I just did what maybe some others are doing right about this time of the 2024 season, and that's forget about USC football. Welcome into Trojans Live right here with us here at the Voice of College Football. Of course, I'm next to Matt Zemek, Trojans Wire. Get on over there. Check out the USC football coverage there. Matt, how you doing tonight?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. And hey, Mark, I don't blame you for, thinking about things other than USC football. If USC was, 7-1 right now, or even 6-2, and you forgot, I would take you behind the woodshed and give you a country whipping. But USC's 4-4, totally irrelevant. You've been with your family the past couple weeks. That's been a much more constructive thing than the Tuesday night USC show as USC football returns to the Clay Helton zone of irrelevance. So really, forgetting about USC football, it's actually a pretty rational, normal thing to do right now. So you have nothing to apologize for. But if USC was 7-1 and you forgot, then we'd be raising hell, of course.
Well, I will say, Matt, that it almost seems apropos. And
Yeah.
if you're not reading between the lines, folks, what happened here tonight is, of course, we've got our Tuesday show with Matt and myself talking USC football. And I'm on my couch plugging away at all Voice of College Football business related stuff. And I get a text from Matt. We doing the show tonight? Oh, yeah, we got a USC. Completely slipped my mind. So my apologies, everyone. We will knock it out here, and we will, of course, take your comments and questions. On the other hand, to not my defense would be, of course, this is what we do, is talk college football all the time, regardless of wins or losses. We've got a Rutgers channel. We've got an Indiana. Well, that wouldn't be a great example this year, would it? An Indiana channel, just to highlight that we talk college football regardless of the wins and losses. So, yes, whether it's the middle of May or it's the middle of a marginal, mediocre, maybe not losing season, but again, marginal and mediocre in late October, we are here talking USC football. So good to see you, Matt, as always. I missed the last two shows, so thanks so much for holding us together with, we appreciate Adam Lamparello jumping on board last week, and a win against Rutgers. Now, I did see a good portion of the game, and they simply outclassed Rutgers. That was not much of a football game, just too much athletic ability, too much speed, and Rutgers got into a shooting match in which they were ill-equipped for. When Ethan Kalkimanis and a Greg Schiano offense is forced to throw 47 passes, that is certainly not their game.
Yeah, so, and part of this whole USC irrelevance theme and reality, it was magnified by, very, very late start on Friday, starting around 11:10 in the East. And of course, the Dodger-Yankee World Series game, was in extra innings when the USC game started, and Freddie Freeman hit the grand slam home run, and people were at the Coliseum looking at their phones, just as people were at the Laker game looking at their phones, so USC got completely overshadowed by that. And then, of course, there's the full Saturday of college football, and USC wasn't part of that. So, just in terms of the news cycle, if there was any kind of bump or buzz to be gained from this Rutgers win, well, the Friday night start and the World Series, it just drowned out USC in the news cycle. So USC is not something that people are talking about. And of course, at Trojans Wire, I got some readers from, burying Lincoln Riley after the Minnesota and then more recently the Maryland game, because, the pitchforks were out after those losses. Beating a bad Rutgers team, that's not going to move the needle at all. So it was just the ultimate weekend for just zero, hot button discussion about USC, and all of these confluences of events just kind of magnify that. So as we now try and discuss the state of USC, as we try and look at the condition of this football team and this program, two really big themes overall coming out of the Rutgers game. And one is that, USC was finally able to dominate a bad team. The offensive line played great. Miller Moss played great. Woody Marks played great. So the offensive line plays at a high level, at least relative to the opponent, and it all comes together for the offense, right? And like that just makes sense. It's very much in concert with everything we talked about in the offseason and into the early weeks of the regular season. If the offensive line does a great job, it all comes together. Miller Moss plays great. People were burying Miller Moss, and to be sure, like, he's made some critical mistakes late against Penn State, the third quarter interception against Maryland. To be sure, he has made some pivotal mistakes that have hurt USC at times. But the idea that he should be replaced by Jaden Mayaba, the idea that he's not a good quarterback, the Rutgers game showed if the offensive line does its job in front of him, it all comes together. He's a very good quarterback if he gets the help. And that was my theme the whole offseason, right? Miller Moss is not Caleb Williams. He can't do it himself. He's not Superman. He's not going to wear a cape. He needs the help from his 10 teammates, especially those 5 big uglies up front. When he gets that help, he's really good. When he doesn't get that help, he's not able to transcend like that. And so that analysis has held up entirely this season. It's the offensive line which has held the program back. And so that leads us to the other really big point about USC going into November, going into this game at Washington in Seattle. Can this USC offensive line do against Washington, and then later in November against Nebraska, and then against Notre Dame? Can it do against half decent or really good teams that it's going to play in November? Can it do what it did against Rutgers? Can it do that against better opposition? Because if it can't, then we're just going to remember this season as the only teams USC could hammer were Utah State and Rutgers, and you could say maybe Wisconsin for the second half. But any half decent, moderately good team USC couldn't beat. So that is really what's at stake in November. Can the offensive line specifically and the team in general play at a reasonably high level, play a reasonably complete game against a moderately good, if not really good, team? I would place Washington and Nebraska in that moderately good, average, maybe slightly above average, but basically middle tier, right? Washington, Nebraska, middle tier. Notre Dame, top tier. Can USC play well against middle tier or upper tier teams? Because Rutgers is not middle tier. Rutgers is bad. Rutgers lost at home to UCLA. Like that was the flashing warning sign heading into USC Rutgers, and it was reinforced by what we saw on the field. It's very surprising that Rutgers has fallen off a cliff the way it has, because it actually started the season okay, got a road win at Virginia Tech, and it just went very south very quickly. The blowout loss to Wisconsin, I didn't see that one coming because Wisconsin had not shown a very high ceiling. So that was also a flashing red light as well. But anyway, can USC now, can USC, if USC can beat Washington by 22, if USC can beat Nebraska by 22, not just Rutgers by 22, okay, maybe we have something. And maybe it's that dynamic where, Happy's learning how to putt, and this team is beginning to really figure it out. It's beginning to truly coalesce, and you walk into the bowl game in the offseason with real world momentum, and you get a better 2025 recruiting class, and maybe you get some really good transfer portal pickups, and you might have something for next year. But we need to see that first. We need to see USC go into Husky Stadium and deliver the goods. And, we were clamoring for, obviously we'd love a complete 60-minute game, but let's at least get 45 good minutes. And we got that against Rutgers, all right? But now can you do at least 45 good minutes in Husky Stadium against Matt Rule in Nebraska, who almost upset Ohio State in the horseshoe? And then can you do it against Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame on Thanksgiving weekend? So that's what's at stake in November. And the one last thing is that if UCLA is technically a road game because it's at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. But of course, it's basically a neutral site game. It's obviously not a game where USC is walking into a road environment. That's basically going to be a split stadium. So technically a road game, but for all intents and purposes, UCLA is a neutral site game. So Washington is really the last true road game on the schedule in 2024, because Nebraska's at home, Notre Dame's at home. So if USC loses to Washington, the Trojans will walk away from 2024 with zero true road wins. Michigan, Maryland, Minnesota, Washington, 0 for 4. LSU neutral field. What an embarrassment that would be, and what a negative recruiting tool it would be for Dan Lanning and for Kyle Whittingham and for the other Western programs that compete against USC for upper tier talent. USC cannot have that noose around its neck in terms of negative recruiting. You got to get a true road win on the board in your final shot. So, while USC is obviously not playing for conference championships, it's not playing for a New Year's Six, all that's out the window, done, no hope, no chance. This game at Washington is very, very important for the reasons I've just stated. So if USC can, go into Husky Stadium, win by 20, you can begin to make a case that, maybe this program is not in as bad a condition as we previously thought. And maybe you're seeing this team, after getting kicked in the face multiple times and failing to finish games, maybe this team is finally finding the level of maturity that we all need to see. And we can go into 2025 thinking, we lost all these one-score games. We lost all these fourth-quarter games. If we improve the talent and depth on the roster, we can be right there. Not necessarily at the very top of the sport. That seems a little too ambitious right now, but we could be in like that second tier, right below the top tier in 2025. But again, we need to see this team really come together and do against Washington and do against Nebraska what we've just seen this team do against Rutgers. And if USC is, there in the pig pen, playing a sloppy, uneven game, and it's 19-17 in the final 2 minutes against Washington, against Nebraska, win or lose. If these games are going down to the final few minutes and USC is just leaving the door open and playing well half the time, a 30-minute team, that's been the theme most of the season, then none of us are going to have real confidence about what 2025 is going to bring. It's up to USC to make that statement and really show, we're raising the bar and we are going to go into 2025 and we're going to fix this thing and get it right.
Detective Lokai, thank you so much for your comment, but even more than that, thank you so much for your partnership here at the Voice of College Football. We appreciate you being a member here at the Voice of College Football USC, and of course, for that membership, that we've hosted 17 segments with Matt and myself discussing various USC topics related to the grander scale of college football history, and how it relates to the here and now relationship to USC and the Big Ten. A lot of great topics involving legendary coaches, games, and again, connecting everything to the present and the future as well. So that reminds me, Matt, as I phrase it that way, it kind of leads right into this book, because this is what this is, folks, is called Disputed National Champions. And I am happy to let you know that we released this officially today. So this is a book that I've written about the decade of the 1990s. And I chose the 1990s as the most formative and impactful decade, in my opinion, in the history of college football in determining championships. So think about, at the outset of the decade, we were strictly in the poll era. The AP and the coaches poll determined the national champion. And then we had introduced the Bowl Coalition, which was an attempt to pin number one versus number two, because of the destinations of these various conference champions. We would have number one playing number 8 in the postseason. We'd have number 2 playing number 9. And we'd have these matchups that didn't make sense in regards to determining a champion. Well, the Bowl Coalition, outside of the Big Ten and the Pac-12, and the Pac-10 at the time not participating did its best to match 1 and 2 and was successful most of the time. So we had that iteration, and then of course into the BCS, and then ultimately into the college football playoff era of the 4-team, the 12-team, and what could be a 14 or 16 team going forward. So this is not simply a history book, even though we do go through every season and we lay out the various storylines, the scenarios, the major players in the championship race, what that championship race was expected to be, what it turned out to be, whether the vote was valid, credible, was anybody left out, all of that. What was the impact of that season on the history of college football going forward? What was the impact of those teams? Did they continue to ascend, or was that a last hurrah? What was the situation? And then what we do, Matt, is we take all these seasons and not just lay out what it looked like in 1990, 91, 92, and on through the decade, but what would the conference championship game matchups have been? Because we had no conference championship games, of course, prior to 1992, and then the Big 12 jumped in 1996, but we finished out a decade without a Pac-10 championship game, a Big 10 championship game, an ACC championship game. So it was just kind of interesting to see who would have played in those conference championship games. And then the real fun was projecting and taking all the results of the season and putting them ahead into the eras of the BCS, the 4-team playoff, the 12-team playoff, and the proposed 14-team playoff to see what would these seasons have looked like in the current construct and the current conference alignment. So folks, if you're college football fans, if you're nerds like Matt and I, please check it out. I'll leave the link there in the chat here in just a second.
That's really helpful, Mark, that you were able to take the past and apply it to the more recent times after that particular era of college football, because I think that would really crystallize and clarify, how all the dominoes would have fallen in each of their respective spots. But the big overarching commentary to make about the 1990s, and obviously it's why you wrote the book, disputed championships. It's that you had Georgia Tech, Colorado, you had Miami, Washington, you had an argument between Notre Dame and Florida State in 1993 because Notre Dame won the head-to-head in South Bend. And then you had, the 1996 with Florida winning the national title. But hey, Florida State beat Florida a month earlier. Do you win the national title just because you won the rematch? We can have a discussion about that. And also, with what happened in that 1997 Rose Bowl between Ohio State and Arizona State as well. Like, where do you put the Buckeyes and Sun Devils in that conversation? And then 1998, with Florida State getting in there against Tennessee. So, to me, the 1990s really does reinforce my main thing about how to resolve college football national championships, is that if you had a +1 after the bowls, that you can maintain the older traditions in which each team should be happy to play in its own regional bowl game, but then you can still arrive most years, not all, but most, with a true national championship in that +1. So, but just hearing how you've laid it out, hearing the structure of how you've not only researched the past but applied it to the future, or to subsequent years after that decade of the 1990s with the Bowl Alliance, Bowl Coalition, and then at the end of the decade, the BCS, applying that to the playoff era, it's very helpful for readers. So definitely a good reason to buy that book.
You can imagine, just one more note on the book before we move on, folks, and talk more USC. And I think, Matt, that you can definitely grasp this, is that people ask me, well, was it difficult to write a book? Well, of course, it wasn't easy. Now, I didn't write a novel. It's 100 pages. So, you can get through this pretty quickly. There's a lot of lists, a lot of rankings. But it wasn't so much. I'm not a great writer. I will not promote myself as a great writer, but I'm probably a better writer than a broadcaster. So I can write to a certain extent. It wasn't so much the writing, it was taking the scenarios forward into these eras and making sure that I was ironclad and consistent with my process of thought. I'd have to go over and then think, no, that's not how I originally set out to do this. No, we got to rethink this. And it was just not making sure that I was consistent again with applying the 1990s results to what would happen today was a little confusing at times, and trying to work through that, especially with all the conference realignment.
That's right. Yeah, like TCU was in a different conference like every 3 or 4 years for a period of time before it finally settled on the Big 12. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, no, the process has to be consistent, and yet you're working with different systems, the BCS, the 14 playoff, the 12-team playoff, the 14-team playoff. Yeah, so like you had to have a consistent architecture to fit into each of those systems.
We appreciate y'all being here at the Voice of College Football. We'll take your comments and questions. Of course, we're talking USC coming off a disappointing loss, or I'm forgetting about the Rutgers win. Just like I forgot about the show tonight, forgot about the Rutgers win. I was going back to the Maryland game. They did defeat Rutgers by 22 points. They're looking ahead to a date against Seattle and Pac-10, Pac-12 vibes, of course, with USC getting together with Washington. And just to get back to an earlier point that you made, Matt, about USC matching up against this new contingent of teams in the Big Ten, because there was so much anticipation that we've had for the last few years, and specifically in this previous off season, to what is this going to look like? And this conference certainly has a layer of, well, Oregon's playing better than everyone, no question. Ohio State, they have the talent to right their wrongs and get back to where they would like to be. Penn State, we will see this Saturday the difference possibly between 2 and 3 and where Penn State stacks up. And then it kind of drifts off into what was expected to be USC. Iowa's been a little bit of a disappointment. Then there's just this glut of teams. There's about 10 or 12 deep where you have no idea who's going to win these games. And when you bring up Rutgers and how bad they are a horrible football team. They are just, they are supposed to be sturdy and stout. We're not expecting, fleet wide receivers that are going to be first round NFL picks, but man, USC pounded them for 6 yards per carry. Like you mentioned, Wisconsin just blew them away into submission, and they lose to UCLA. UCLA even was able to
35 points
spit in the face of the 3-time zone travel to go out to Piscataway and put up the 35 points. So that's just a lousy football team. And now USC again lines up with another team that's just kind of like USC seems to be wearing down a little through this Big Ten schedule. They had played better earlier. Now they take it on the chin by 2 scores against Indiana, against a backup quarterback. Of course, they lost to Iowa as they were just bludgeoned in the second half. So they're taking on a decent, as you phrased it about as well as you can with these Big Ten, this mid tier, that they're okay teams. They're decent teams, but they're nothing that USC shouldn't be able to handle. And our projection, largely between the two of us, was fairly similar in our approach to this season, that this was going to be a really good, like, top 15 team in the country, somewhere in that range, 15 to 20. I picked them to go 8-4, but to go and beat LSU on opening night, to be able to take Penn State to overtime and really outplay them for most of the game, and to have that same team go out to Maryland, who's otherwise 0-4 in the Big Ten. They can't beat anyone. They lost to Northwestern.
And they're losing blowouts
Yes.
to the bottom half of the Big Ten. Yes.
And again, I think Minnesota's a little bit better than maybe we thought a month ago, but still they're
A
not
little,
a
a
really good
little.
football team.
Minnesota went down to the wire with UCLA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to you, what can be gained out of all of this in regards to playing, decidedly better than Nebraska and Washington and some of these teams that can move into the off season in terms of momentum, but real tangible progress?
Well, so Rutgers was a bad team, and against a bad Rutgers team, USC's offensive line looked good. But against moderately better opposition, USC's offensive line has not been able to dominate a game. I mean, the LSU game really was the LSU and Penn State games were the two best non-Rutgers, non-Utah State. Like let's just shove aside Utah State because that's a total cupcake game. In terms of like big boy meaningful games, the LSU and Penn State games were the best from USC's offensive line. But even then, those were games where for at least a quarter and a half, the USC offensive line didn't play well. I mean, the USC offensive line was good against LSU, but there was like at least 15, 20 minutes of gameplay when LSU's defensive line was able to outplay USC. And then, of course, against Penn State, first half was magnificent, but then Penn State's defensive line stopped USC in the third quarter, early into the fourth quarter. USC has the great drive to take the 30-23 lead midway through the fourth, but then at the end of regulation and then in overtime, the offensive line couldn't do well. So like USC's ceiling in terms of the offensive line playing well against a reasonably good opponent, LSU, Penn State, any Big Ten road game, the ceiling has been, I would say, to be fair, 40 minutes. I think you could say that USC's offensive line has played 40 good minutes against some of its better opponents, but that's just 2/3 of a game. And with the margins being relatively small, the margins being what they are, that's not necessarily going to cut it. And so the offensive line is where USC has to make the biggest jump. Now, obviously, USC needs more depth on defense, but the thing is, you have that proven defensive staff, and I think that Danton Lynn, Coach Henney, woof, and Matt Entz, like they should be able to recruit because people can see how much better this defense is, and like guys should want to play for them. Guys should see that they're going to get quality player development on an NFL track, but it's that offensive line where Josh Henson, he and Lincoln Riley, like they need to be honest with each other. Lincoln and Henson have to have a roadmap which says, okay, are you going to be able to land some 5 stars? Are you going to be able to land some skull crushers, some bone crushers? Like we can't let Dan Lanning and other top programs in the West or in the Big Ten outfight us for the really, really big fish. USC has to start landing the really big fish, the biggest fish in the pond. Like losing Josh Connerly to Oregon. I mean, USC fans might try to minimize that particular recruiting loss all they want, but can we just admit, with Oregon's offensive line playing well and the Ducks being number 1 in the country, can we just admit how big a recruiting loss that was and still is? Like, I know USC fans hate Oregon, but you just have to square with the reality in terms of how important it was for Oregon to win that recruitment and how damaging it was for USC to not win that recruitment. So if there is no roadmap, if there is no strong plan and strong likelihood that Josh Henson is going to land 5 stars in December for 2025, he's got to go. He has to be gone. Like you can't just settle for mediocrity. And the place we've arrived at with Josh Henson, it's the place we arrived at with Alex Grinch, really in the Cotton Bowl, but like for sure, in the Utah and Washington games last year, like it became certain that this is not the best USC can do. USC can do better. Like that it fundamentally is why you fire a coach, right? Like, you've hit your ceiling. You're never, ever going to get better than what you have. You gave the guy his chance. The experiment's run its course. That's it. I think we're there with Josh Henson. And the only thing that would make me reconsider is what I've pointed to earlier. Can he land 5 stars? Can he dramatically upgrade the level of talent on the offensive line? Because, and this kind of completes the circle here, what Lincoln Riley and Josh Henson, but it falls mostly on Lincoln Riley. What Lincoln Riley didn't really understand, or maybe he gambled and he tried to convince himself that his gamble was going to be worth it. But where Lincoln Riley fell short was, all right, I don't have a Caleb Williams. I don't have a Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, elite talent at quarterback this time. Miller Moss, as I've said, when the offensive line is playing great for him, he's a really good quarterback. It all works out. The Rutgers game kind of reaffirmed that basic truth. But if you don't have a Superman type quarterback, all right, you need your offensive line to be elite. And that, in terms of roster construction for 2024 at USC, Lincoln Riley didn't piece that together. He, realizing, okay, I don't have a Superman quarterback. I have a really good, smart game manager who can make the quick throw, who can make the check down, but he's not going to be able to run for 35 yards when a play breaks down. He's not going to be able to stuff the highlight reel. And consider what Cam Ward is doing for Miami. Cam Ward has turned a Mario Cristobal team into a Lincoln Riley team. Miami is winning games 52-45 and 37-34 and 39-38. It's so wild that Miami is winning games the way Lincoln Riley used to win at Oklahoma and then in 2022 at USC. But why is that the case? It's because Miami has a Superman quarterback. And Lincoln Riley with Miller Moss was not a Superman quarterback. That's not a criticism of Miller Moss. We all knew he's not going to be able to win games himself. He's going to need help from the other 10 guys on his offensive unit. But if you don't have a Superman quarterback, man, your offensive line has to set the bar very, very high. And Lincoln Riley, both in recruiting, which partly falls on Josh Henson, and also in the transfer portal, did not get the reinforcements to put Miller Moss in the best possible position to succeed. So that was the central roster construction failure of Lincoln Riley and Josh Henson in 2024. And so if they can't land the really big fish, I don't see any legitimately good reason to keep Josh Henson on board for 2025. And USC needs to find its Danton Lynn, Eric Henderson equivalent of an offensive line coach to raise the bar at that position, especially in recruiting, but of course also, getting the technique and the teaching and the player development. So that really is, to me, the central problem right now for USC. We can talk about NIL, and the ways in which that all has to be restructured. But like Lincoln Riley, a year too late, but he got around to it. He upgraded his defensive staff. Now he needs to make that same kind of upgrade at the offensive line coaching position. If he can do that, if he can get the right guy, the way we feel that Danton Lynn is the right guy for this defense, USC could be really, really good in 2025. But now, does Lincoln Riley have the clarity and the boldness to make that decision? And is Jen Cohen going to be able to exert enough influence on Lincoln Riley to say, hey, we need to get this offensive line and specifically offensive line recruiting in alignment? Lincoln, you need to make a tough choice. I can't just let you wing it. You're going to have to arrive at a real decision here. Do we have a plan to upgrade our recruiting and our talent at that position group? Jen Cohen needs to be involved in that conversation. She can't just let Lincoln Riley fly freely here. Too much on the line, right? So that is the central issue in my mind at USC right now.
The total defense numbers aren't the end all be all, but it's an indication of how well the defense is playing. 72nd in the nation in total defense, number 80 in yards per play against. I was going to guess that the numbers were a little bit better than that, because when I look at the defensive performance, again, based on the expectation of the team, based on what was reasonable, the thought was the offense should be near elite, should be really, really good, should be top 20, 25. And then if the defense can be in the 50 to 70 range, much better than what it's been in the past, that was a reasonable expectation of what D'Anton Lynn could provide, and also a reasonable expectation of the athleticism on this team. It's been my thought that really just it's been in recent weeks that the secondary's been beat up a little bit. That obviously Bear Alexander, I don't know that he was that much of a presence, but another body along the defensive front, that they've had some attrition that has really hurt their defensive performance over the last few weeks. Otherwise, I think it's generally hit the mark of what the expectations were and should have been.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Like USC has had so much attrition over the past month, and it's been key players. Eric Gentry was the first really big piece to fall in late September. Like that was bound to have an effect. And then you lose Anthony Lucas late in the Minnesota game, and that proved to be pivotal in that Minnesota loss. That you already have Gentry out, you have Bear Alexander out because of his transfer, and Anthony Lucas. Now, without Eric Gentry and Bear Alexander, USC was still containing Minnesota, 10 points allowed in the first 50 minutes of that game. But Anthony Lucas was the straw that broke the camel's back. Like, at some point you lose a certain number of high-level players on your defense. At some point that is going to have an effect, especially for a program that, does not currently have the kind of depth that a Georgia, an Alabama, an Ohio State does. On defense, we knew that USC wasn't at that elite level in terms of depth. So you lose your high-profile players. That's bound to have an effect. So, yeah, I mean, you can't really blame D'Anton Lynn for a situation that he largely inherited. Like he's doing the best he can. Like his plan against Rutgers was really good. You want to force Kaliakmanis to throw the ball a lot. That's exactly what happened. Like that was a smart game plan. Like this guy knows his X's and O's. USC has not been able to get a pass rush. That's been, that really showed up against Penn State in the fourth quarter with Drew Auer making that comeback against the Trojans. But so I don't think you can say that guys haven't been in position to make plays. Like one of the things with the secondary, guys are in position to make plays, but we've seen several times receivers out jumping USC defensive backs on 50-50 balls, USC defenders not timing their jumps as well. Like not they might locate the ball, but then they don't go get the ball and they're out jumped for a ball. But it's not as though they're out of position. Like that was the Alex Grinch problem. They weren't even in position. Also Dante Williams as well. Doug Belk has largely had these guys in position to make plays, but they're not finishing. And so, to me, the coaching deficit with this team, it's, there's a little bit of Lincoln Riley there. Like his decision to kick the field goal against Maryland was an absolutely atrocious decision. Like you can't trust your offensive line to get 1 yard against Maryland in the fourth quarter. Like what does that say about a coach's willingness to trust his players? So that was horrible. And of course, just he hasn't been able to coach toughness in a team. And for people who might be inclined to say you can't coach toughness, no. That is definitely part of a coach's job. And it's not just the weight room either. Like I haven't been mentioning Benny Wiley because I don't think it's been a case where raw physicality has been the problem. Like the problem with the offensive line is that miscommunications. Two guys go to one blocker, another rusher comes free around the edge. It hasn't been, raw physical strength. I mean, there have been moments where guys have been overpowered, but a lot of the times it's just miscommunication. Like Josh Henson has not really coached up these guys really well. But just to kind of, draw back and go full circle, with this USC team, and in terms of what the issue really is, not being able to rise to the occasion in these high leverage situations is really the common thread in all of these losses. USC led in the fourth quarter in each of its first 7 games and was 3-4. Now that's hard to do. It is hard to consistently lose games that you lead in the fourth quarter. And so that's why I don't think this is a strength and conditioning issue. It's not something I'm going to put at the feet of Benny Wiley, but Lincoln Riley's made some questionable chess moves, but also Josh Henson has just not been able to get this offensive line consistent enough so that when you need that tough yard, you need that one late first down to run out the clock and not entrust this game to a battered, shorthanded defense. The offense is the unit that, much more than the defense, has left something on the table and is the main reason why this team is 4-4 instead of at least 6-2, possibly 7-1.
Folks, if you're on social media, X or Twitter in particular, please follow us at the Voice of College Football. That's at the VOCFB. Rankings, ratings, all sorts of engagement and discussion. You'll love it if you're a college football junkie, which of course you're here. Therefore, you're a college football junkie. So please join us on X at the Voice of College Football. That's our official account right there. Matt, what's going on at Trojans Wire?
Well, there is this sport called basketball, and USC beat Gonzaga in an exhibition game. So that's some really good news. People got fired up about that, but people aren't fired up about football. And I'm like, they shouldn't be, right? Because USC is going to be, 6-6, 7-5, probably. That's not going to get anyone excited. So the football news that's going to get people excited is first getting some really big fish in recruiting and in the portal in December and January. And the other thing is Josh Henson getting fired. And just, there's a comment here. I think Henson stole his girlfriend. Bro talks about him constantly. Hey, Mike, this is the problem with USC, right? This is the problem with the coaching staff. This is the weak link on the coaching staff. Should we not be talking about him? Should we not be pushing for his firing? Because the offensive line is what has held USC back. Just to put a finer point on it, 5 minutes left against Michigan. Need 2 first downs to basically salt away the game. The offensive line gets blown up. 17-10 against Minnesota, 2nd and 5 from the 36, early fourth quarter. You get a first down, you're then in comfortable field goal range. You can win 20-10. If you get a touchdown, you put that game away 24-10. Mason Murphy misses the pass block assignment. Miller Moss gets hit, interception, game completely changes. Penn State, again, at the end of regulation, a lot of pressure on Miller Moss. He throws the pick. Overtime, the offensive line gets completely dominated. USC doesn't score. Penn State wins. The offensive line has had chances to nail down wins, to put games to bed. The Maryland game, obviously Lincoln Riley didn't trust that O-line on 4th and 1, but nevertheless, it remains that the offensive line couldn't get that final first down against Maryland. If the offensive line does its job in several different high leverage situations, we're not having the Josh Henson conversation, but it didn't. This is a bottom line business. You either get that yard, you either get that first down, you either finish the game or you don't. And the offensive line really, far more than the defense, precisely because the defense has been missing so many key players, and it's not just Anthony Lucas. It's not just Eric Gentry. There are lots of other players who have been missing. The offensive line needed to be sealing these games so that the undermanned defense wouldn't be placed into a do or die situation, but it hasn't happened. So I don't know how you can criticize my criticism of Josh Henson when that is clearly the most urgent coaching issue and problem with this staff. You got the defensive side of the ball figured out. Lincoln Riley got that part settled. You have to resolve the Josh Henson problem one way or the other. Now, if he's going to go out and land some 5-star offensive tackles, okay, retain him. But unless that happens, there's just not enough reason for him to stay on. So your fixation on my fixation on Henson, I admit it's a fixation because it's the big problem right now. So I don't like what should we be talking about in terms of the medication, the medicine that USC needs to get healthy. Like it runs right through Henson and the offensive line. I don't think you can really debate that. If you want to, you're welcome to, but I don't see how you arrive at a different conclusion than that, right? Like I would think everyone would agree. Josh Henson is the USC assistant coach who is very much on the hot seat and is coaching for his job in November. Like if you think that Josh Henson should get the 2025 season to coach at USC, end of argument. Like there shouldn't even be a debate. I would strongly push back against that. Like Josh Henson has to do something in these next few months to earn retention. And if he can't, Lincoln Riley and Jen Cohen need to be on the same page, and they need to say, hey, we need an upgrade here, period.
We appreciate y'all being here at the Voice of College Football. Again, we've got channel memberships available, 17 segments, choice cuts. Matt and I got together during the off season and diced up a number of historical topics, but related to the current state of USC football, the transition to the Big Ten, the future. So check out those segments. You went there in regards to a reference to a potential season-ending record. Do you recall your record prediction at the beginning of the season? 9-3. Okay, you went 9-3.
Yep.
I went 8-4, and I took some hits for that here in regards to the chat that I was being too. That's not being pessimistic because I'm not a USC fan. This was just me making a call. And I certainly was borderline between 9-3 and 8-4. So I'm not overplaying my prediction as being some kind of genius selection because they're going to be hustling to get to 8-4 at this point. 6-6 is the most likely because you got to think they're a decided underdog against Notre Dame. And for them to sweep the other three, the way they're playing is unlikely. Nebraska's been, at least this past week, played a really good game in Columbus, and the trip to Seattle's going to be a difficult one. So 7-5, 6-6 looks to be, but just think at the outset of the season after a win against LSU to think that this would have come down to a 6 or 7 win season. Wow.
Yep. Just want to address this point from our Alabama friend here. The defense gives up leads in every game. Not sure if that's true about the offense. Well, I mean, the offense it's not the offense's job to protect a lead. It's the offense's job to build the lead or to run out the clock so that the defense doesn't have to play an extra possession at the end of a game where it can give up the lead. If the offense could run out the clock in some of these games, and it's had the chance to, then the defense doesn't go back on the field with the game on the line. And the other thing is that this defense has been banged up. This defense has been shredded by injuries. Like the USC defense, folks, I mean, for those of you who don't follow this program pretty closely or kind of, jumping in from the outside for tonight's show, the USC defense has been hit so much harder than the offense in terms of injuries. Like you do not have most of your first string defense right now. You didn't have it against Rutgers. All right. It's a mash unit right now for the USC defense. The offense has been largely intact. And that point that the offense, and specifically the offensive line has not been decimated by injuries this season. So that puts it more on Josh Henson, and it makes it more clear that the offense broadly, if you're just going to compare offense versus defense, the offense is so much more the reason for USC's failures this season than the defense. If the defense had not been shredded by injuries, and we're talking about the opening day starters not doing their job and not holding the fort in these recent losses, totally different conversation. But you haven't had the elite horses. You haven't had Eric Gentry. You haven't had Anthony Lucas. You haven't had Bear Alexander. You haven't had some of these other guys in the secondary as well. This is a banged up defense. It's when one side of the ball is injured and shorthanded, it's the other side of the ball that needs to pick up that banged up unit. The offense has had many chances to do that and has whiffed in every significant 50-50 moment. I think, the one exception being the Wisconsin game. Gentry got injured in the Wisconsin game. The offense really did pick him up in the second half. But in these other recent games with a shorthanded defense, the offense didn't pick up the defense. It did not help the defense out when all these injuries mounted. So, hopefully that offers some clarity in terms of the offense-defense balance that we're talking about. It's not a full-strength defense that's been giving up leads. It's been a shorthanded defense that's been giving up leads. When we also consider that Maryland gave up 37 to Northwestern, Maryland gave up 48 to Minnesota, USC scored just 28 against Maryland. Come on, that is on the offense. That game was definitely on the offense more than defense. Miller Moss threw a pick six, so actually, Maryland finished with 29 points. The Maryland offense scored just 22 points. The USC offense should have done more than enough. The defense did its job. The offense couldn't finish off that game when given the chance. That's definitely more on the offense, and it really shouldn't be that much of a point of debate.
And just to accentuate that point from a different angle, you have to understand what the program is built on. So we're not talking about an elite program where there is shared responsibility between the offense and the defense and the special teams. We're talking about the offense being the forerunner of this program. The head coach is an offensive-minded guru. That's his calling card. It's a quarterback-centric, wide receiver, weapons-centric offense or team. And it would be like us criticizing if Iowa's defense was giving up late scoring drives to lose games in the last minute of the game over and over and over, and us saying, what's wrong with that Iowa offense? They should be expanding the lead to 2 or 3 touchdowns. No, Iowa's a defensive-driven team. Therefore, they shouldn't be giving up touchdown passes with 20 seconds left to be losing games week after week after week. If their defense is walking out onto the field protecting a 4-point lead, well, it's expected that the Iowa defense, because it's a defense-centric program, is going to make those leads stand up, and they're going to win the game.
No question about it. Couldn't have said it better myself.
We've got Adam checking in. Adam, we appreciate you, of course, and join Adam over on the Rutgers channel right here at the Voice of College Football. He does Rutgers postgame and, of course, does a Rutgers show every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern. Did I get that right, Adam? I might have screwed that up. There's so many shows at this point, Matt, I lose track of them. It might be Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Adam asks here, what is the factual and evidentiary basis to believe that USC will improve upon this year's performance in the coming year?
So, Adam, I really think, that recruiting is going to tell the tale. Recruiting and transfer portal acquisitions, like USC's starting 22. I mean, this was a point that Tim Prangley has made, and, I did agree with him that the starting 22 had the makings of a good team. But then did you have the depth behind that starting 22? And that's where the question marks really began to emerge. And so on defense, as soon as the depth problems were exposed, the defense had a much smaller margin for error. The offense needed to compensate for that. And the offensive line, again, as I've said many times, was not able to close the door in several different situations when it had the opportunity to do so. So, Adam, in terms of USC improving upon current performance, it has to start with recruiting and portaling, just beefing up the line play. It's so much about the line play because you don't have to have a Caleb Williams type quarterback. Like Miller Moss, if you give Miller Moss an elite offensive line, if you give Miller Moss the best offensive line in the United States, he'll win you 10, 11 ball games. But USC has not had anything close to the best. USC has, on balance, a pretty average offensive line, an offensive line that can play 30 to 35 good minutes a game, but rarely exceeds that total. It certainly can't play a complete game unless the opponent really stinks, such as Rutgers, such as Utah State. So there isn't a whole lot of evidence right now, Adam. You just got to be honest and tell it like it is. We don't do Clay Helton sunshine pumping here at the Voice of College Football. But if the line play talent, especially on the offensive side, can be upgraded and USC can make some significant portal acquisitions, particularly offensive tackle, like if you can get a Bobby Haskins 2022, if you can get that for 2025, a guy who can just lock down a tackle spot, you can rely on him. He's going to be there. Justin Dedich, Brett Nealon, Andrew Voorhees, they were injured for portions of that 2022 season. But because Haskins was there and he was reliable, that line was able to be held together. As long as two of the three, Dedich, Nealon, Voorhees, as long as two of the three were available, USC was able to play without one of them, but you had Haskins doing his job up front, and the line stayed intact, and the line was able to do enough for Caleb Williams to win the Heisman Trophy and win 11 ball games. So USC is going to need to hit a home run in the portal with an offensive tackle. It's also going to need to do that on defense, but the first priority is offensive tackle in the portal. If you can get that and you can beef up your offensive line recruiting as a whole, that's how USC can get better. That is the central path to getting better. I'm excited for what Jaden Maiava can do next year, assuming that he gets the keys to the offense. I'm sure that he's learning a lot, and assuming that USC does get to a bowl game, Maiava is going to have the bowl game as his audition for the coming season, much as the Holiday Bowl against Louisville was Miller Moss's audition. And I think there are raw and natural tools with Maiava that can give USC more upside than what we see from Miller Moss, just because Maiava is a dual threat guy. And just being a dual threat, that just naturally opens up more possibilities for what an offense can achieve. It's not a criticism of Miller Moss. He's just a drop back quarterback, okay? He's not a sprinter. He's not Superman. So if USC can surround Maiava with a better offensive line and can become a more physical, deeper, nastier team up front, that is the central path to improvement for USC.
We have an Amazon link in the description section of all the videos, including this one. And if you grab the Amazon link and you use it, guaranteed, it will be the same exact shopping experience as when you use whatever link that you are currently using. Amazon, they are smart people. They have built a system that instantaneously knows exactly who you are, transforms to your account, your history, and everything. And what that does is, let's say you spend $1 at Amazon, it throws 3, 4, 5, 6 cents, depending on the item, here to the Voice of College Football. So you can contribute here at the Voice of College Football without spending a penny in that sense. Otherwise, we do appreciate the Super Chat contributions. Adam, thank you so much for that, sir. And again, Venmo, PayPal, and Cash App as well at MarkRogersTV. Just mark that it's for the USC show. All right, Matt. Appreciate you being here. And once again, folks, it was my issue, us arriving late. So we were glad that you could catch up with us tonight. The game against Washington. I didn't see any time or TV listing. Is that
7:30 Eastern, 4:30 Pacific, and it's on Big Ten Network. And unless I don't even know what's happening in Game 4 of the World Series, but assuming that we don't get a Game 7, and that's looking pretty likely, if the World Series doesn't go 7, then we don't have USC and the Dodgers going head-to-head. So we shouldn't have to worry about that particular problem for Angelinos. The other thing is next Tuesday, You might have known there's something called an election. So I think, we're all going to be following that. And also USC doesn't have a game that following Saturday. So, like, it's more important to follow a very important night in the life of our country than to talk about either 5-4 or 4-5 USC during an off week. So we can all take next Tuesday off, and I don't think anyone's going to be that hurt about it. And if you are, hey, USC basketball next week. Juju Watkins, Eric Musselman. Focus on the round ball, right? Because it's not really a fun time for USC football right now.
Thank you, everyone. And of course, the USC Call-In Show comes your way on Wednesday night with Tim Prangley as well. You get your questions lined up for Tim on Wednesday. Matt, we always appreciate you being here. Without you, we don't have a show. So thank you so much for showing up to knock this out. And again, that's your destination for USC athletics, folks. Trojans Wire with Matt.
Before we sign off, Tim did a really good interview with the Los Angeles Football Network, LA Football Network on Twitter. You want to check that out.
Very nice. Good stuff. All right, Matt, thank you so much. And we will make it back here soon. Keep those subscriptions lined up with the notifications to know when we go live, but we will see you soon.